And welcome to Stirring the Pot podcast, a podcast all about discussing controversial food subjects, historical aspects of food, and pretty much everything else cooking and food related. Once again, let me introduce my co-hosts. First up, we have Mr. Barbecue Brand, an aficionado of all things barbecue and a recently featured guest on Food Network's Barbecue USA. Welcome, Barbecue Brand.
Thank you. Ain't no stopping. What's popping? Let's get it going.
Second up, we have Mr. Brandon D., a connoisseur of Louisiana and Southern cuisine and a self-proclaimed food science nerd. Welcome, Brandon D.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody, to the podcast. Let's get it started.
I am your host, KCP, a baking and cooking enthusiast and a lover of all Southern culture, history, and cuisine. Tonight's topic covers something we all know and love, steak. We're going to cover all aspects from cuts to finishing sauces. To start us off, why don't we talk about choosing your steak?
Oh, choosing your steak. You have to talk about cuts. You have to talk about, the different marbling within the steak. But we can go to the basics, right? Let's say you go to the grocery store, you're looking at all of the meat, it's all overwhelming, you have all of these different names. You want to make sure that you pick something that is uniform in size so that you don't have to do a lot of trimming to it. You don't want a whole lot of scraggly loose ends on your steak. If it's just something that's been butchered really bad, you don't want that. You want something that's been butchered well. You want something that has pretty good marbling in it. It doesn't have to have, and when I talk about marbling, I'm talking about intermuscular fat, the white specks and white lines you see in your meat. You want to look for that. You also want to look for color of your steak. You don't want your meat to look gray or old. You know what that looks like whenever you see old
section.
Meat, some old meat. You don't want to get that. You want to find something that has, a nice redness to it and just something that looks good. If it looks good before you cook it, then, if you cook it properly, it's going to look good and taste good when you finish with it. So that's the basics choosing a steak. But it gets a little bit different whenever you're looking at different types of steaks too.
Right. And you also want to avoid something that's too thin. A thin steak is just going to be very, very hard to cook. Unless you're just talking about the natural thin cuts like skirt or flank steak, where they're just already thin, but you don't want to get anything. You don't want to get any really thin cut ribeyes or strip steaks or anything like that. So you want to have a good thickness on your steak.
Absolutely.
So what are the different types, like the cuts? Like what can somebody get, like if you go to the grocery store?
Let's talk about the prime cut that everybody wants to talk about first, and that is the ribeye. The ribeye is it really is one of the best steaks. It's really the steak that people look for when they talk steak. Ribeye is usually king. So the ribeye comes from the rib section of the cow. The cut actually varies from one end to the other. One will have more cap, one will have less cap. You can have a half cut steak, which means they cut the rib bone in half, and then you have like a full cut steak, which is where they cut pretty much on the bone line, bone to bone, so that you end up with a really thick steak. That's probably like a 2-inch steak or 1.5 inch or close.
Yeah, usually
it depends on the cow.
Yeah, you'll usually get it from the just like you said, the rib section, and I believe it's the rib roast that's usually cut up. Right. We spoke about this in previous episodes too. That's a really popular area of the cow. Even when you're grading cows, like whenever you see USDA grades of choice and prime and select, they're pulling from that ribeye section. They're grading the cow by the ribeye, I guess. We can grade the cow by the ribeye too.
With how beef cuts work, you have a primal cut, and then you'll have a subprimal cut, and then you'll have your actual cut. The subprimal for ribeye is the ribeye roast. So, what you can actually buy in the store, you can actually buy a whole rack of ribeye and cut it yourself.
Yeah, I've cooked that thing whole before, and it's absolutely delicious. You have to.
It is, yeah. It's called a prime rib.
Yeah, I've done a reverse sear on that. If you don't know what a reverse sear is basically cooking your steak or cooking something to an internal temperature the way that you want it, and then after you have gotten the temperature that you want, then you will sear it off. So I've done that on a reverse sear, and it was absolutely delicious. So you can cut it down and make your ribeye steaks too on how thick you want it if you purchase that subprimal cut.
If you buy a ribeye rack, unless you have a bone saw, you're doing full cut ribeye. So you'll end up with some pretty thick steaks. But the good thing about a thick steak is it's actually really forgiving to cook. You're gonna have it's gonna be it's easier to cook a thick steak than a thin steak. So it's kind of counterintuitive because it just has a lot more room for you to kind of, hey, look, maybe I cooked it 30 seconds too long on a 2-inch ribeye. It's really not going to make a whole lot of difference. So,
no, you got a lot of forgiveness there.
What I like doing with really big ribeyes is you cook a big ribeye. You don't serve a whole ribeye. You'll cut it up. You'll cut the steak up, and you'll actually dish it out as just parts of it. And I think that's a good way to do steak. You don't always have to serve everybody a steak. Sometimes it's a good thing for you to cook, let's say, like multiple steaks. You want to cook a ribeye, you want to cook a strip, you want to cook some filet. You cook all these up, you cut them up, and you actually serve different portions, a portion of each steak, so everybody gets kind of like a taste of one. Because ribeye is real good, but being married to eating the whole one, maybe you don't want that for your dinner. So,
yeah, the best bite on a ribeye steak to me is what they call the spinalis.
Cap.
Oh yeah.
Oh
that piece right there is just marbled and tender. It's amazing. The next time you look at a ribeye, you see that little piece that just looks a little bit more marbled than the rest of the steak. Then make sure you get that. We'll call that the cook's cut right there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the cap. Every time I see somebody trimming steaks and they cut off the cap, I was like, oh, you just ruined it, man. Like, really? That's like it's the best part of the steak. That part and that little fatty end on the little fatty tip on the end of the ribeye. Two best parts of it. So it's really one of the best tasting bites on a cow because it's got a lot of marbling. It's really tender and it's got a huge amount of flavor.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So what would be, if ribeyes were not available, what would be your second choice?
Strip. New York strip is my second favorite. It's also a good choice if you're looking for a steak that's a little less fatty. Then a strip is a good choice. A strip is kind of like a balance between the leaner sirloin and filet, and then you have strip as kind of like your middle ground.
God dang it, Brandon! I really wanted to contrast you on this episode here, but I gotta agree with you. That strip, dang man, that strip is actually the New York strip is the first steak that I ever learned how to cook. Probably about 12 years ago. Me and my wife decided to do the VIP experience for the Food and Wine Festival in Austin. And we rubbed elbows with a lot of celebrity chefs at the time. And that was one of the things that actually got me cooking. Side note on that. We did a VIP grilling, not barbecue, but a VIP grilling experience. It was 200 people. Everybody had their own pit. Everybody had their own ice chest. We're shooting tequila at 9 o'clock in the morning. Tim Love is on stage Tim Love is on stage just telling us exactly what to do. We were cooking on lump charcoal, and he had us cook that New York strip, and he had us finish the steak on the coals themselves. So we actually took the grates off and put it directly on that natural lump to finish it off, and it got really crusty on the outside, and like it was till this day the best bite of steak I ever had, and I fell in love with New York strip ever since.
Yeah, strip is a really good cut. It strikes the balance between being fatty and being lean, and that's why I really like it. I also love T-bones too. Half of the steak is a strip, and the other half is a fillet. And depending what end it comes from, where you get the really big fillet side, and that's called a porterhouse. So porterhouse has a little bigger fillet on it. T-bones that are further down have a little less fillet on it. So the T-bone is also another great cut. Anything on the bone is going to be awesome. I love ribeyes on the bone too. The cowboy cut ribeye is probably my favorite cut of steak ever. So don't be afraid to cook one on the bone. They really are fantastic. But
any meat on the bone, if you're going to be grilling it.
It's fantastic.
You can't beat it because you got
the bone got that flavor. Oh my goodness! Just nibble around the edges.
At a fancy, people think about this at a high end steakhouse. They'll be really offended if you don't chew the meat off the bone. They're like, they find out, why'd you order that? You're just wasting it. Don't try to be. You can't be delicate with that. You just have to go in for it and eat it. And it's some of the best bites on the steak.
Don't be ashamed. You can take that bone home with you.
You sure can. Yeah, you sure can. Take a.
Chew on it at the place. You can chew on it at home.
Oh yeah, don't throw that away. Don't leave that on the plate. Take that with you and chew on that at home. You know you want that.
Yeah. Tomahawks are awesome too.
So what is
I
a
love a
tomahawk?
good tomahawk.
Tomahawk is a ribeye steak, definitely a single cut steak. So when we say single cut, I'm talking that means you cutting one rib bone. You're cutting in between the rib bones to get a single cut steak. So they're usually really thick. You can be over 2 inches thick. It's usually a bigger ribeye too. Cows come in all kinds of sizes. So the processors use certain cows for certain things. If they think it's going to make really big steaks, they might use those for making tomahawks. So tomahawks are usually really big. I think they're usually, oh man, what? Sometimes
Ooh.
like 60 ounces or something like that. They're big. They're big.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's a big steak, and man, I hate when food gets popular and it starts to become a fad because I used to be able to get tomahawk because I love them. I love cooking a good tomahawk, but you used to be able to get them for a good price, and now you're paying so much money, and then it weighs a lot because it has a very large rib bone on it. So you're paying for part of that bone. You get to nibble on parts of it, but then the other part is just all bone that's been cleaned up. So
right, yeah. I guess they call it Frenching when you trim the meat off the bone. So you'll have a really long bone. That's why they call it tomahawk. What's that?
Did you call that Frenching?
Yeah, when they scrape the
I was talking
meat
about
off the
sucking
bone.
on. I was talking about like nibbling on that bone, and you talking about Frenching. I was like, I thought somebody else had a name.
Yeah, this is a family friendly podcast, so.
Oh man.
So it's called Frenching when you scrape the meat off the bone. Tomahawks are great though, but unfortunately they've gotten really popular, really expensive, and they do weigh a lot, and it's usually over 48 ounces of meat. That's usually the case. So it's quite a bit.
It's usually a shared steak, is what you're saying.
Yes, yeah, it's a 2-person steak.
Unless you're real hungry.
If you can eat a whole tomahawk, I don't think you're going to feel very good afterwards.
No. We should ask Adam Richmond about that. Didn't he eat a whole tomahawk or something?
Oh gosh, yeah, that guy ate all kind of crazy stuff.
Oh my gosh, probably. So I have another question. I've heard of a Thor's hammer. What exactly is that cut?
That's a beef shank.
That's the shank. Yeah, that's the.
So it's not a steak.
No, you wouldn't call it a steak. It's,
okay.
But I mean, they're serving it in steakhouses now, they're pretending like this didn't used to cost $3 a pound. That's the funny part. Beef shank was really popular. They used to just cut them into, you could call them steak pieces, and they would use it for ossobuco. So that's what it was really popular for. But now people are just smoking beef shanks. I guess they figured out that was a thing.
Ossobuco, side note, is absolutely delicious. If you ever go to a restaurant and you see ossobuco on the menu, just order it. Thank me later.
Yeah, just get it.
I think that translates. I think ossobuco translates to on the bone.
Something like bone hole or something like that. It's something kind of funny. Thor's hammers are shank. So those are usually. I've never tried cooking one. Have you tried cooking one, B?
No, I haven't. And you know what? The reason I haven't is because I hate the fads sometimes.
Yeah, I agree.
Like, I appreciate the creativity. I do. I eventually will, but I'm not dying to go find it so I can cook it.
I saw one in the store and it was like, man, it was like $60. I was like, I don't know about that.
Yeah.
Selling it for $6 a pound.
So I seen oxtails in the store the other day. And that's become a famous thing to smoke now, is these large cuts of oxtail. And oxtail used to be one of those things that were very cheap. I feel like we could talk about that for any cut of meat.
That
it's so expensive.
That is a future episode of popular poverty food that has now become expensive.
Yeah, so exactly. I'm looking at these oxtails, and it was like. It was almost like the Costco ribs. You know how whenever you go to Costco and you get the 3-pack of ribs, one rack of ribs is really good. The other rack is decent. The other rack is terrible. So that's what these oxtails were. One was really nice size, and then the other two was just kind of, And this pack was like $25 for these 3 cuts of oxtail. I was like, no, I don't need to jump into the fad and smoke this bad.
But now this brings up a good point that we're talking about this poverty food that has become popular because it became trendy, and it actually is a cut of steak, and it is the skirt steak, which has really increased in price with the popularity of fajitas and from my opinion is one of my favorite cuts of steak, and I believe it's somebody's favorite steak here. and skirt steak is fantastic because it has really great flavor, really great texture. I mean, just one of the best tasting cuts of steak on a cow.
I think it's so good. Like, it has so much, to me, it has more of a beefy flavor than other
very beefy
steak cuts. And it's easy to cook. Like,
it is.
It's easy to mess up too, but it's easy to cook, you know. And even with the reverse sear method, you can cook. We'll cover that later on in this episode, what that is exactly.
Right.
But yeah, so I have a question. I also like flank steak. So what's the difference between those two cuts?
Well, I don't know. I can't remember where flank steak is cut from. Flank steak and skirt steak are different cuts. Skirt steak actually comes from the inside of the rib of the cow, and then you have two cuts of skirt steak. You have an upper and a lower, or something like that. I remember.
Yeah,
one's a little better quality. One's a little less fatty. One's a little bit more fatty. But they both are super beefy. I say the only thing beefier than skirt steak is probably brisket, beef tongue, and beef cheeks. That's the only things that I think that are really beefier than skirt steak.
Yeah, skirt steak is. I learned this a long time ago. Actually, I learned this at the Food and Wine Festival that I was speaking about a little earlier. If you go to a higher end Mexican restaurant, they will serve you, which is the lower. I believe they call it the inside skirt steak.
That's right, inside and outside.
Yes, the inside. So they'll serve you the inside part of the skirt steak, which is a little bit more beefy, a little bit more marbled, a little bit better tasting overall. And then some of your
just your taco joints.
Yeah, just something. They have basically whatever they can get, like the outside part of the skirt steak. Different cuts there, different qualities.
Both pretty good though. Both
definitely,
really good.
Definitely.
There's nothing wrong with the cheaper cut of skirt steak. It's fine too, and it actually makes really good tacos.
Yep, that's right.
So that's what Taco Bell has.
No. Who knows what Taco Bell has? Something.
Taco Bell got that parallel universe meat. I don't know what that is.
It's
what
actually pretty questionable.
What is the steak at Taco Bell?
Hey, another way we call that old stuff, ass and elbow,
That's that weenus. The elbow, that's that weenus meat.
Yeah, we call it ass and elbow, A&E.
Oh man. Okay, so there's another cut that I'm curious about. It's not a very popular. Well, these aren't very popular cuts, but the Denver steak and a hanger steak. What are those? Barbecue brand.
So the Denver steak is something that's becoming really popular. I haven't made that yet. I haven't even actually found that in stores. Mm-hmm. As soon as people start getting wind of it, you're going to start seeing it in the stores, and it's going to be, $25 a pound for a Denver steak. I heard that it's really good. I haven't even had it yet. I've heard that it's really good. Yeah. People really like it. New cuts are being invented every day from the cow.
There's a lot of meat on a cow.
There's a lot. I have actually had Denver steak. It's really good. It's very beefy. I think it comes from the chuck roll, and you have to cut it out of the chuck roll. And the only people that really do it are the butcher has to know how to cut a chuck roast, because economics with beef are very it's very tricky, because when you cut up a cow, when you take, like, say I get a chuck roll, which is going to be your subprimal, and you're going to cut that in, you have the butcher has to think of the economics of the cuts he makes or what's going to sell. So he could cut chuck roasts, or he could cut Denver steaks. But if he cuts Denver steaks, he may lose some part of the cow that. And if people don't know what Denver steaks are, then could he have made more money turning it into ground beef? So that's why I have to say, when it comes to cows, is economics is very important. Like, one cut you never see is beef navel. Beef navel is traditionally what they make pastrami out of. It's beef belly, right? They call it's called a navel and beef belly, but it's not a very popular cut of meat because it's really fatty. So they normally just turn it into ground meat.
Yeah, you have to know someone to get some of these cuts. You're not just going to find them, because you're right. It's not economical. It's sort of like finding really, really thick cuts of pork ribs. You're not gonna.
Oh,
it's
man.
hard. It's hard to find because if you have
Impossible.
really thick pork ribs, then you're taking away from your pork belly. So to preserve the belly, they're cutting the ribs down. So it's all about economics and what they can sell and make the best bang for their buck.
That is very true. So what is a hanger steak?
Now, hanger steak, I've never had hanger steak before, but hanger is they call it a butcher's cut. So people, because there's not really many of them on a cow or from where you cut it from. So butchers would keep the hanger steaks for themselves. I know it has a connective tissue that runs through the middle of it that you have to kind of like split out. Hanger steaks are supposed to be really tender, very beefy. It kind of almost looks like a thicker cut of skirt steak, but it's got like that similar look to it. But I've never actually had one. I've seen one. I've just never bought it.
I haven't. You'll get a lot of different steaks that are called something else too.
Yeah.
So,
right.
Especially down south.
Right. Yeah. Also, another good one, a new one that's becoming really popular and I like a lot, and we've had it fairly recently, is picanha.
Picanha is delicious. Now, picanha is from the sirloin, and it is amazing. It's so tender, and you have to cook it right. Don't overcook it. Don't cook it to death. Don't cook it till it's tired. Just kind of sear that thing off a little bit. It's definitely
a medium rare steak. That's another important part of is cooking this, and maybe is the doneness you're cooking steaks too. So not all steaks really work at the same doneness. Some are better medium. Some are better medium rare. Some are better what they call black and blue, which I don't really care for, but because I'm not a real fan of cold meat. And black and blue is a really, what you do black and blue is a really high temperature sear, really quick, and you end up with a really hard crust on the outside, but actually a pretty cool middle part of the steak. So
yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
no.
I don't know about that.
Yeah,
it's not for everyone.
I like my food hot.
Yeah, it's not for everyone.
Yeah, and like we were talking about before, some of these cuts just kind of appeared. Like picanha was a cut that was really popular along with tri-tip. Tri-tip is another steak that comes from the sirloin. Yeah. Tri-tip is more of a roast than a steak, but it's you really kind of cook it the same. But you've seen those cuts a lot in California, and they just kind of make their way down south as it got a little bit more popular. People started to ask for it. I went into a store and I was watching a video one day years ago, and I seen someone cooking a tri-tip. I went to my local butcher, and I'm like, man, do you have any tri-tips here? And he just looked at me weird. And he's like, we haven't had that for 5 years in here. He's like, nobody asked for that. And he's like, you're the first person to ask for this in 5 years. I'm like, well, I want them. So if you can cut that for me, that'd be great.
Right. And picanha is real popular in Brazil. Brazilian steakhouses, I think that influence too has made picanha a little bit more popular too, because you get it at a Brazilian steakhouse. It's like one of the main things that they serve, and they actually do a really good job of it.
So we didn't talk about filet mignon.
Filet, yeah. Filet is...
I know. I'm just trying to think of things that people will regularly hear, like when you think about steak, most people, I think, either think ribeye or filet mignon. So as far as tenderness goes, what steak cut is the most tender?
Filet mignon is the most tender.
Absolutely.
It is the most tender. It's not as flavorful of a cut because the cow, the muscle is basically is the least used muscle on the cow. So on any four-legged animal, you'll have a tenderloin section where that muscle doesn't get used very much. So it doesn't have a lot of connective tissue. It doesn't get worked very much. So it doesn't have a really strong beefy flavor. So if for fillets, I highly recommend fillets is one of those steaks that are actually really worth getting a prime steak in a fillet. You get more flavor out of that. Fillets are really good. Very, very tender cut of meat. Pretty lean too, actually. Not a lot of fat in it.
The fillet comes from the tenderloin, which is basically going to be along the back. Down south we call it the backstrap, but it's basically a tenderloin. Right. It's the beef backstrap is essentially what it is, and
basically
it's a very tender cut of meat, but it's not very marbled. I would go with a prime as well. In that cut.
Rare too. It's best cooked. It's best cooked rare to medium rare. Definitely. That's the only. If I order filet, that's the only way I'm ordering it.
So is that because it's a leaner cut, it's not as fatty?
Correct. There's not really a whole lot to render out, so you don't really get any benefit from cooking it over medium rare.
Gotcha.
Yep.
And you're like ribeyes, those you want to order maybe like a medium rare or medium, like to render some of that fat out.
I know people will jump all over me on this, but I typically order ribeyes medium because I think it renders the fat out just a little bit more, and it kind of breaks down. If you have a little bit more fat on it, I think it takes a little better if you cook it just a little bit more. That's my opinion, but
I agree. I agree because the ribeye is just it's so flavorful on its own. And there's so much fat in it. You got to cook it just a little bit more and kind of sear it a little bit harder. And it just creates that crust that is just phenomenal. The outside is going to carry the steak because of how flavorful it is, you know. And so if it's medium, you absolutely fine. You don't have to have a ribeye medium rare. I don't like my ribeyes medium rare because the reason I want a ribeye is for that crust on the outside and how fatty it is. But you don't want to get a big chunk of fat when you eat that hasn't even been hasn't touched the fire. You know
it's pretty gross to have because sometimes even a prime ribeye will have a big chunk of fat in it. And it's not good when that fat has barely seen any heat. I won't order any bone-in ribeye medium rare. I'll order it medium because I think that you get more flavor out of it when you cook it medium.
Yeah.
Because of the fat content.
Right. So talking about all the steak doneness, this is a nice guide to show everyone what we're talking about. So at the top you have the extra rare or the blue, and it shows your temperature on the side, 115 degrees to 120 degrees, and all the way down to extra cooked, well done at 160 plus degrees.
That's also called a crime against humanity. That is just never eat a well done steak.
Yeah, I don't know. Some people like it that way. You know, they probably still chewing on it right now. But
you're trying to work out your facial muscles. That's the way.
You're trying to build them cheeks up a little bit.
Jawbone strong.
You know, if that's the way you like it, that's the way you like it. But here's a good guide to kind of gauge the different cuts. Like we were talking about filet mignon, we prefer it like more rare or medium rare versus the ribeye, which is we prefer it at more of a medium. And you can kind of see the doneness and the illustration where the center is more pink versus, you know, the ones further down, which are all brown.
That's right. You don't want to, for a ribeye, you don't want to go any further than medium, though. I like it medium, but the more you cook it, the more like chewy it'll become. So
it becomes very tough.
Yeah. I like the 140 to about 145. I don't like it past that. So, and for medium rare, I like strip steaks medium rare. But the trick with a strip steak is you have to sear that edge of fat on it. You don't want to leave that unseared. So anytime you're cooking that, you flip it on its edge and you cook that edge of fat and get a nice sear on that too.
Definitely. Don't forget about the sides.
Yeah, don't forget your sides. Really important for a very thick steak. If you have a really thick steak, you definitely want to cook the sides of your steak.
Absolutely. That thick steak, THICCCC, thick.
Thick.
Moving on to our next part, we're going to talk about seasoning your steak. So we're going to start cooking your steak now. So this, I'm going to let Barbecue Brand have the floor with this one to start.
Here's the first rule that I'll give you with seasoning your steak. If you have a nice cut of steak, we are not trying to cover up the steak. We are trying to enhance the flavor of the steak, and we are trying to complement the flavors of the steak. We don't want to get rid of the beefiness. We like beefiness. If you're eating steak, you got to like beef, right?
Correct.
Don't get rid of the beefiness. You want to add ingredients that are going to complement your steak. So generous amount of salt, generous amount of pepper. And then from there, it's a little bit of preference. If you want to add some garlic, that's fine. I like some herbs. I love rosemary on my steak. I love rosemary in beef. I will add some rosemary, maybe not full sprigs of rosemary, but what I may do is rest the rosemary on my steak whenever I flip it or something along those lines. Using some butter on your steak with your rosemary, that kind of thing, giving it a little hint. So I'm a really simple guy when it comes to my steaks because I like buying good cuts of meat. I don't really buy trash that I have to cover up and make it taste like something.
Right.
No bad steaks. So what about you, Brandon?
Like I say, like Brandon said, all you need is salt and pepper. That's all you need on a good steak. It's salt, pepper, and then after that, it's kind of up to you. I mean, rosemary's a good flavor. I like to cook my rosemary in butter and then use that butter to baste the steak with. I also add other herbs. I'll add I'll add garlic. Sometimes I'll use, if I have it, I'll use a little bit of tarragon. Tarragon's a really good flavor on a steak. But stuff really light herbs, nothing that really will overpower it. Garlic, like I'll make like a butter where I'll just put like shallots and garlic, some rosemary, and maybe a little bit of thyme, maybe a little bit of tarragon, but usually it's just garlic, rosemary, and thyme are usually my typical ones. There's other things you can use. You can use oregano, but oregano can be pretty potent, so you have to be real careful with it. Oregano has a nice flavor, but overusing it on a steak will kind of wipe it out. But you can actually use oregano to kind of tame strong meat flavors that you may not be particularly fond of. That's why like oregano and lamb really go well together, because oregano kind of tames lamb down. But with beef, you don't want to really tame it because the beefy flavor is what you want. So you don't want to tame that down.
Right.
That's right.
And you could add some crushed red pepper too. A little bit of heat on a steak never hurt anybody.
A little heat ain't nothing wrong with that.
But you want to avoid, what you do want to avoid is you want to avoid seasonings that hurt your crust. So you want to avoid paprika, any type of cakey seasoning. Paprika or cayenne pepper powder is real cakey, and it'll actually burn in the pan and actually prevent you from making a good crust. So you want to avoid those. To add other flavors to steak, this is why I heat up butter. And I put herbs in the butter, and I'll heat that up and get the butter a little brown because, hey, brown butter's king. If it's brown, it's better. So you'll get that flavor that
chew.
Yeah, I said it, man. So you'll get that flavor too. So, but that way you'll be able to get the flavors. You'll be able to use the oils in the herbs and spices. You'll be able to get that into the butter, and it'll actually help really tame it down. Especially your rosemary. Rosemary cooked in butter is way tamer than rosemary cooked in just adding rosemary sprigs to something. So that's a really good way to do that, because herbs have they have compounds that are water soluble. They have compounds that are fat soluble. And some of them have compounds that are alcohol soluble too. So you can bring different flavors out by using different things. You can use, oil, or you can use water. Where using oil tends to tame the flavors down, tends to bring more of the mellow flavors out. Where if you put rosemary in water, you'd really taste like that real piney taste to it, rather than kind of like a richer taste. So I use that. That's how I add like the herb flavors to my steaks. I use butter. I heat herbs in butter, and that way, when I add it to the steak, it'll be a nice tame flavor, and it'll also pick off any type of heat flavor. So if you do like crushed red pepper or something like that, it also works.
So I want to piggyback off of that really quick too, just to clarify what I said earlier. We want to make sure that we do not use a lot of powder if we're searing at a high temperature, because that is just going to burn and scorch, and it's going to give you an off flavor to your meat. When you're using salt and pepper, we're talking about coarse salt. So use like kosher salt. 16 mesh black pepper, which is the coarse ground black pepper. Use those things, because that's going to help to stand up to the heat a little bit better and give you a better crust on your meat. You don't want to use powdery substance with high heat.
Correct. Or definitely, I know this is just crazy, but I'm just putting it out there. Nothing with like sugar. If like you have like a seasoning blend, and if it has sugar in it, obviously that's gonna burn when you put it in the oil.
Right. Especially if you're pan searing. On if you're grilling, you can kind of get away with a little bit of sweet, because you don't have that direct contact, and you can control it a little better.
Yeah.
So that might be okay on a grill, but a pan, no sugar.
In a pan. No, the fire department going to show up at your house.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, B. You can use a little bit of sugar when you're grilling. You can do that. But yeah, if you pan searing, keep the sugar off.
Right.
Yeah.
You're going to need that dish towel to fan at the
Yeah. Make sure you turn that vent hood on, but sugar in beef is another, sugar like we say, un poquito, very, very, very little sugar. You don't need a whole lot of sugar on steak.
Right.
Or any, really.
True.
So let's move on to cooking methods for steak, all the different types. Let's start off with we've been talking about searing. Let's talk about the reverse sear and the sear. Let's start sear and then reverse sear.
Well, you always want to sear your steaks, right? We always want to develop that crust. We always want to get that Maillard reaction and get a nice brown on it. And there's different ways to do this. Reverse sear is my personal favorite. Now, you can reverse sear on a grill, or you can reverse sear in an oven in a pan. But you can reverse sear starting in a smoker. One of my favorite ways to do it when I have a lot of time is I'll take steaks. I'll actually put them on a little bit of smoke. Get that smoker at about 250, 275, never higher than 275. And then put those steaks on there until about like you say, about 140. If it's a ribeye, 140, 145. And then just get a little bit of smoke on them. Take them out. You let them sit for about 5 to 10 minutes. And then you'll just hit it in a pan and sear that. And then you'll get a nice sear on it because that protein is already warm. So you've knocked the chill out of the protein. So that protein is much, much more prepared for searing. So that way you get a nice hard sear on it. So that's one way to do it. Now, the thing I have to say about reverse searing, it's better if your steaks are really thick.
Yes.
It's a thick steak. If you have a really thin steak, it's not the best method to do because the steak will cook really quick. If you're doing like a really lean steak, lean meat, remember lean meat cooks faster than fatty meat. So you want to have a nice thick steak for reverse searing. That's my thing. And that's my favorite. One of my favorite methods is smoker to pan. Now, there's all kinds of way to do reverse sear. B, if you want to talk about that.
I, too, like the reverse sear method. If I'm cooking a lot of steaks for people, then the reverse sear method can really work for you. It depends on what you have to cook on. For instance, whenever I'm cooking a tomahawk steak, I like to reverse sear it. Because I know that thing's going to take a little while to get to the internal temperature, being 60 ounces, right? So
right.
Right.
And tick.
Yeah, tick. But if you have a thinner steak, you really don't want to cook thin steaks to begin with. First of all, let's just go ahead and get that out. We're not talking about cooking thin steaks. We're talking about cooking, 1.25 inch steaks. All right.
Yeah. Real steaks.
Steaks. Okay.
Over an inch is primary. I personally, the thicker the better it is, I think. But
yeah,
definitely not under an inch. That's just too thick.
No, definitely
it's just
not.
A waste of time.
Yeah.
So pretty much.
I really like cooking steak in a pan.
I
really do. Even though I'm a grill guy, I love cooking steak in a pan because it gives you way more surface area to work with. You get a lot more just that crust on the entire steak. And I mean, who doesn't want more sear, like more crust on their steak, right? So,
oh yeah, absolutely,
man. If you can control your heat, and we haven't even talked about cooking vessels and all of that, but if you can just control your heat and sear it properly, add your little garlic, little butter, little rosemary in there, kind of infusing that butter, and you just kind of baste it. It's just better than the grill to me. It just is.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I said it.
You don't want them grill marks?
Look, I'm gonna say this. I'm gonna say this. You're gonna have to bleep it, but your grill marks. Useless. Means nothing. All that means is you have less sear on your steak than a steak that you would actually sear all over. That's all it means. Grill marks are stupid. And that's not to say you can't get a good sear on a grill. I don't care about grill marks. I really don't. It's the stupidest thing ever. Does it look good? I guess, but that means I have patches of unseared steak between my seared steak. I don't care. So, but you can't. No, this is not. You can actually get a full sear on a grill. you have to cook it very hot, like a Weber kettle grill is great for searing steaks. You actually have to move it around a little bit more. So you have to kind of move it to get all the burn on it. So searing on a grill, you'd actually flip it multiple times, not just wear it on a pan. You set once, you set the other side, you take it out, you sear the sides, you're done. There's all kinds of methods, but it's just, you get a different effect from every way you cook a steak. So a reverse sear is going to give you a certain effect. Cooking on a grill is going to give you a certain effect. You're going to get that charcoal flavor if you cook over a grill. If you're a real fan of that charcoal flavor, and you like it over a grill, that's a perfectly great way to cook a steak too. I like that too. So what I used to do is I used to do sear oven technique. That was my technique. That gives you a different effect than a reverse sear steak. Another one we have to talk about is sous vide. Sous vide is a great way to cook a steak, but that's going to give you a different texture than a reverse seared steak. Because remember, when we're cooking in an oven, it's an evaporative cooking method, so water is leaving the meat. So when you cook in a sous vide, you're actually cooking way below the boiling point. You're cooking at 145. You're going to be cooking it in its own juices, so it's going to have a different texture. But not a bad texture, just different. So
right.
A prime rib would probably be a good cut for sous vide.
Oh yeah. I definitely, when I cook prime rib, I definitely use a sous vide because it's such a big cut of meat. I can drop my prime rib into my sous vide and cook it at exactly 135 degrees and I can leave it in there for 5 hours and it'll never change. So the reason you can do that, because the water is not leaving the bag, you're not evaporating water out. The thermal mass of the food remains the same throughout your cooking time because your water's not leaving. So as you drive water out, the temperature will start to rise in the food faster as the water leaves. So that's why things go from being done to burnt in a very short period of time.
So for those that do not know what a sous vide is, can y'all explain that to our viewers?
Yeah, it's also called
it's also called an immersion circulator. That's another name for it.
Yeah,
but you've used it more than I have, so you take this lead on this.
Yeah. No, so I was just going to touch on that. So a sous vide, essentially, what we're talking about is you have a vat of water. I like using the word vat lately. I don't know. It can be a pot, it can be a tub, it can be anything, right? So you have that filled with water. We're not talking about putting food in water. We're talking about taking your food. Let's say a steak, okay? So since we're talking about steak, taking your steak, putting inside an airtight bag, whether you get all of the air out of a Ziploc bag or you use your, what is it called? The vacuum sealer. There we go. You use your vacuum sealer, you get all of the air out. You leave a little bit extra of the bag. So you suspend the bag in the water. You clip it to the side or you have it suspended in the water. And then you use your immersion circulator, which is just this device. And that process is called sous vide. You take your immersion circulator, you put that in the water, and that circulates your water at the exact temperature that you want the water to be. And it continues to stay at that temperature and cook your food at that temperature.
Science.
Exactly.
Science.
Right.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure our viewers knew what that was, because it's not like a typical cooking method.
Man, I tell you one thing a sous vide is perfect for is pork chops. Man, make you the pork chop genius right there.
Pork chops are my nemesis. I have cooked perfect pork chops once. Nice. My daughter cooks better pork chops than me. She has medals and trophies to prove it. But when it comes to the sous vide, I'm a champion.
We'll definitely touch on that subject later. But it's very precise. You can get the steak to exactly the temperature you want. Now, it'll hold it there forever. What I mean forever, if you keep adding water to the sous vide, it'll hold that temperature forever. Now, if you go too long, you will eventually break down the steak too much and it'll become weird. So it doesn't take long. It takes only about, I'd say like a couple of hours, you'd be good. Just leaving it in there. Restaurants love to use it because they can hold steaks at certain temperatures. They can hold, hey, we know this percentage of customers want medium, this many want rare, and they can hold those steaks at precise temperatures and not worry about overcooking them for service.
You can use the sous vide method for a lot of different things.
A lot of things.
We went to a restaurant here locally that sous vide their chicken before they smoked it, and they made it that way. I don't know if you remember that. We went there, and my wife had the chicken, and I asked them how they made it, and they're like, "Yeah, we just sous vide it and then threw it in the smoker and finished it that way." Economical. It's an easy way to get pump out food, and that's of good quality, you know.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about, now we've cooked our steak. Let's talk about the toppers or the sauces that we talked a little bit about like the butters, making like herb butters and stuff on the side. But when you want to finish your steak, you want to serve it up, what you want to put on it.
That A1, girl.
Oh, not that Heinz 57.
Oh man, HP sauce. You know, all the weird mystery sauces that are just like, what is this made out of?
No offense, guys. Those well done steak eaters, they love them sauces.
Because they need it.
Yeah, you need some moisture.
It doesn't. That's the only moisture in their steak is that A1 sauce. So that's terrible.
You don't eat ketchup with your steak.
Not the sound effects.
No. Yeah, I mean, it just like look, guys. Steak sauce is a crime. A1 sauce. There's actually better uses for A1 sauce than steak. There really is. It's not that. It's not that A1 sauce is bad. It's just bad on steaks because the people that put it on steaks are cooking bad steaks. Don't cook bad steaks.
Sorry, guys. Sorry.
Steaks. I mean, I'll be honest. I'll say this. Steaks are absolutely one of the easiest things to cook.
It really is. It really
is.
And
that's
simple. Why we wanted to cover that tonight, because you shouldn't be intimidated by steak. No. I cook steaks. I do reverse sear. You know, I'm more of a bacon kind of girl. But, I mean, it's easy. Anybody can do it. And you can do it well. So
That's right.
And it impresses the people to know, and wow, look at this steak is perfect. This must be really hard, and like, there are much harder things.
I work hard.
I can tell you this: cooking a perfect pot of grits is more difficult than cooking a steak.
Facts.
Big facts.
It's gotta be, because I've been a lot of places that don't know how to cook grits.
Nope.
I went somewhere yesterday morning and the people didn't know how to cook grits. Just that recent.
Yes,
it's different story for a different day.
Salt.
Yes, exactly.
They had
Don't
none.
be afraid to salt your food.
They had this many grams of salt in them grits.
So different steak toppers. Like, what do y'all like to use? I know we talked about the butter with the rosemary and like infusing different types of herbs with oils. What are some other sauces? I will say mine. Mine is chimichurri.
Okay, yeah. So chimichurri is good. Chimichurri is a mixture of pepper flakes, parsley, garlic, shallots, sometimes red onion, salt, pepper, oregano, basil, and olive oil. Good olive oil. You have to use a really good olive oil to make good chimichurri. Now, I have my own take on chimichurri. I'll actually be posting a video where I make my version of chimichurri, which is a little bit different. Because, of course, I can't do anything original. I have to just go and screw around with it. So, I have to change it to make it my own. But it actually uses the same type of principles as a regular chimichurri. It's just a little bit different. But just classic chimichurri is really good. Sometimes it may have some cilantro in it, but it's always more parsley than cilantro.
Yeah.
You never want to substitute a 1-to-1 for cilantro with parsley. It's too much. Cilantro is strong. So if you want to use cilantro, you would take maybe like a quarter of amount you use of parsley and add the cilantro to it. Personally, I don't care to have my chimichurri with cilantro, so I don't use it.
Yeah, we're not making salsa,
No.
But I like a good cream sauce with my steak from time to time. I love funky flavors. So we actually put blue cheese on our steak.
Oh, that's good too. That's a good one. But you want to use a really good blue cheese.
That's correct. You want to use a really good blue cheese. There's a blue cheese that I can't think. It may be Grand Reserve or something that I get at Costco. It's a really creamy blue cheese, or a good Gorgonzola, something along those lines.
Not Danish blue. That's too strong, too funky. And if you want to try it out, start off with a little bit of blue cheese on it.
So, have you guys ever heard of or use additional proteins to top your steaks with?
That can be tricky. You definitely can. There are some like if you're doing like a surf and turf, some people use like a seafood based like cream sauce. It's good. I think it's kind of what you'd say would be gilding the lily. You're making something. You're trying to stack something.
In a while.
Yeah, you're just trying to stack something.
Sometimes you want to be fancy.
Right. That's true. That's sometimes, but shrimp and steak is a great combination. That really goes well together. Scallops and steaks is also good. I usually don't use a lot of proteins because, man, I'm buying steaks already. I got to buy more meat.
Right.
Yeah.
But definitely. But another thing that goes a really good like side with steak is mushrooms.
Yeah.
A good mushroom sauce is awesome on a steak too.
Yep.
That kind of gives you that little bit of that funky flavor. If you're not a fan of blue cheese, but you want a little bit of kind of earthy flavor, a mushroom goes really well with a steak.
Yeah, absolutely. I make a lobster thermidor, which is essentially you take your lobster and then you make your cream sauce on the stove with your lobster with mushrooms, and it's a whole show with the flambe and everything. But the sauce that it makes when you're done is just so good with beef. So a lot of times if I want to be fancy, I'll make my little lobster thermidor with a steak, and I'm usually by the end of that steak, I'm dipping that thing in that lobster shell in that cream sauce. So
yeah, man, I never had any.
Yeah, I'm about to say you make lobster thermidor. We never had that before.
We've been to your house plenty of times. I've never had that. I'm starting an official complaint.
You out there a little bit. I'm just saying. Also, I know somebody on this podcast is supposed to make a pastrami for me.
Oh, that's another story.
Why all the men on this podcast in trouble?
Yeah,
just saying.
But another good thing to make a sauce, pan sauces are really good to make. Which basically you do is you'll take the pan you seared the steak in, and you'll throw in shallots. And a good thing to use is a demi-glace. You can make your own, or you can buy it in the store. You'll kind of cut that with maybe a little bit of wine, and reduce that down with the shallots. Then add a little bit of cream, some black pepper, and salt to taste, and that'll make an excellent sauce. So there's all kinds of sauces for steaks. Peppercorn sauce is really good. I've had wine reductions. Chimichurri is great. Chimichurri is my favorite because it's got such an acidic pop and such a bright flavor. Man, it really cuts through a good rich piece of meat. I mean, really does.
I love a good chimichurri, and that sounds good.
But I will make a video posting how to make chimichurri because it's so easy. It's one of those things that looks really impressive, but really doesn't take a whole lot of time. And the only trick of it is you have to make it about at least 4 hours in advance. Yeah, because it has to refrigerate. Because when I make chimichurri, the only thing I really taste for is salt and acidity. Is it salty enough, and is the acid cutting through with the oil enough? But I won't be able to taste any garlic. I won't be able to taste the chili flakes. I won't be able to taste anything else other than salt, acid, and fat. And that's it. So it has to sit, marinate, and come together. And it comes together in 4 hours, and it's perfect.
That's a really good point that you brought up, too, on showing how to make that chimichurri. Because everybody out there listening in the podcast world, don't be put off by some of the words and some of the phrases and some of the things that we're talking about. You know, a lot of these things sound very intimidating, but they're easy to make. They're easy to achieve, and you too can be fancy.
Yeah.
Yes, and if you have fancy, and if anybody has any requests for recipes, just post it in the comments below, and we can work on a video for that. So we're going to try to do more cooking videos.
Please comment if you want us to cover things. Put it in the comments. We always will take suggestions. We want to teach you guys and have a open discussion about how things work with cooking. We want to have these discussions with you.
Right.
With that being said, I want to thank everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you guys on the next podcast.
Hopefully we've let everybody know that steaks are nothing to be afraid of, and it really is one of the easiest things to cook, and you can impress everybody with it.
#me. Peace.
Later, guys.